This is the Effekt podcast. Today a conversation with Josh Clark, the mobile designer, founder of Big Medium, specializing in connected devices, mobile experience and responsive web design. Has also written 4 books, including designing great iPhone apps. This is Josh Clark in conversation with Jan Bidner from UX London, May 2018.
I'm sitting here chatting with Josh Clark of Big Medium, which is, I think, a design studio, New York-based design studio.
That's right, yeah. And mighty Brooklyn, New York, and New York City.
Yeah.
It's been great to spend some time with you, Jan, because we've been in 2 workshops together now and have been talking a lot in the halls, which is one of the great things about this conference is the amount that you get to mix with a lot of people and really get to know people over a couple of days and share some problems and solutions.
Yeah, absolutely. My head is full. It's spinning with ideas and impressions from these days. So, I went to your workshop yesterday, which was designing for what's next.
Yeah.
And today you gave a presentation also called Designing for the Era of Algorithms, right?
That's right.
So your subject is around machine learning and design. Is that so?
Yeah, that's right. That's what I'm starting to think a lot about. I mean, in general, my practice has generally been working with the technologies that are not bleeding edge, but are emergent, that are here and ready to be used, but that we're still trying to figure out how to use them in the right way. And for the last decade or so, I think for a lot of people, it's been about figuring out what's the best way to use mobile. How can we push the frontiers of that new technology? But more recently, I don't think that I'm unique in thinking that machine learning and the glimmers of artificial intelligence that we're beginning to see are probably where the future lies. That if the last 10 years of digital interaction has been driven by mobile, that the next 10 years will be driven by machine learning.
Yeah. And we are talking about pretty advanced technology when it comes to artificial intelligence and machine learning. And yet you're telling us designers to jump right into it.
Yeah.
What is the idea about that?
Well, I've been thinking about this a lot for the last couple of years, really, because it's been clear that all of the interesting new stuff has been kind of coming out with, in terms of the predictive interfaces and bots and natural language. And for a long time, I was thinking, this isn't my role. I don't know what my role is in this, because this is an era that's been driven by data scientists and algorithm engineers. But as I thought about it more and more, and as I began to see more and more of these products and start to work with some of those machine-generated contents and results myself, I realized there's a huge role for designers, because the engineers have shown us what's possible and have done a great job of doing that, of the sort of the amazing things that machine learning is capable of. But what's not yet been done is really thinking about how we should use that. What's the right way to deploy it? Because I think the presentation of data is at least as important as the underlying algorithm.
Yeah. And a lot of these tools, as you showed us on the workshop yesterday, I'm pretty familiar with some of them, but some were new. These available technologies out there to explore. Yeah. You were talking about machine learning as design material. Yeah. I think that was a good word.
Yeah, no, I think it's an interesting thing. Well, and as you said, we were looking at a few different things. I mean, what is interesting is that a lot of machine learning services are available for effectively free, certainly to experiment and prototype with. So companies like Microsoft and Google and Amazon and IBM basically give away their kind of core services. You can build Alexa essentially for free using Amazon's APIs.
Yeah.
And so on the one hand, so a designer could say, well, I guess that's good. That at least means that I have access to this stuff. I don't have to be Amazon to make these things. But the good news is that you can actually, a lot of these things, especially I think Microsoft does a nice job of this, of getting this web-friendly, user-friendly interface to these, so that designers can go in and upload their own images to the computer vision APIs and see the data that comes back and understand what it's good at and what it's bad at, so that we can really sort of have a sense of, well, first, what kind of structured data can we get back to work with and design with and think about building an interface with? But also, how good is it? We can kind of get a sense of what it's good at and what it's bad at, where again, sort of the texture of these materials, so that we understand how we can build a product and how reliable those materials can be and where they're best used.
And you were also talking about humanizing pretty stupid advanced technology.
Yeah.
But also, on the other hand, dehumanizing people. There's a diversity to that.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think one of the things that is challenging about this is that at first blush, you might think, oh, taking humans out of the equation and giving machines the ability to judge who should get a loan or police sentencing or hiring and promotion, that's going to remove bias, that this is going to be an objective process at last. And of course, the problem is that these algorithms are informed by the data from our messy world. And so the risk is that if we don't do this intelligently, we're just going to encode all of our past mistakes and biases into the operating system of our civic life itself. And so one of the things I think that's a really interesting challenge for designers and especially for UX researchers is to think about how we can help the data scientists to build these models in ways that really reflect the whole base of people who we want to serve and that create a base of data that leads to the world that we want to have. Yeah. And I think of it as UX research at unprecedented scale. And I really do think it is that way. And if we start to think of that way as a practice, wow, what huge and interesting opportunities we have and what enormous influence we have on the future.
I agree. And I love the thing you said about diversity, about how we don't want to repeat our past mistakes by just coding what it is, but instead focusing on what is coming up.
Yeah, well, and so part of that is not just trying to do our best to see where there may be blind spots to this, because it turns out that we as human beings have blind spots ourselves. That I think that at this conference, we look around and this is largely a group of white, fairly affluent people from, for the most part, Western Europe. Yeah. This is, I think that sometimes we are not even aware of our own privilege relative to others. And so we don't even know where our blind spots are sometimes. And so I think that it's more important than ever as the products we create serve more and more people with bigger and bigger ramifications, is that we start to work with people who don't look like us, who have a range of diversity. And I don't just mean demographic diversity, but philosophers and poets and artists and people outside of the usual technology bubble.
And also you were talking about manners and vocabulary. The blunt way of the machine sometimes, or on the other end of that, trying to be too human. We were talking about that in Lisa's workshop today. That's right. I think that there's a lot of debate right now with the services, the speech, the voice assistants like Google Assistant that are becoming so more and more lifelike, able to make phone calls that are convincing to actual humans. That is this the right way that we want to go to make them actually convincingly human, especially when they actually still remain far less capable than humans. So Google Duplex just came out, which was a technology demo to show how Google Assistant could call human beings to make a restaurant reservation. But I'm pretty sure that if you started to talk about a completely different topic, it would be lost because these services tend to be extremely narrow. So in that sense, it's deceptive, not just because it's pretending to be a human, but in doing so, it's suggesting that it can do much more than it is actually capable of. And so I think one of our interesting challenges here is how do we create interfaces that set appropriate expectations and channel behavior in ways that actually reflect what the system is capable of. And so in that sense, a synthetic voice, a robot voice, is actually useful, even though it's a bit disquieting. It's not necessarily, it's a human voice, but it informs us how we should speak to it, what we can expect of it. And also it lets us know we're talking to a robot, not to a person, which changes the way that we will interact with it as well. Yeah. So a big role to play for UX then in this.
I think there's a huge role of thinking about how do we present these remarkable machine-generated results and interactions in ways that are transparent and respectful and honest, that reflect how much we can have confidence in the result, because the machines often are pretty straightforward in their algorithm of being like 69% chance of certainty, but we don't necessarily reflect that in our interfaces. We often just sort of say, here's the answer, when perhaps we should maybe say something more sort of like, the results really are not clear, but this may be the answer. In other words, we're always focused on answers, but perhaps we should be looking at suggestions and hints when the machines aren't certain.
Yeah, you gave a great example in your presentation with the dinosaur on the measure, but it was interpreted as a skateboard.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. That's right. It's a Twitter bot called PickDeskBot that just basically gives random images to Microsoft's computer vision API and just gives a description that comes back. And it gets charmingly confused sometimes. But it's also pretty clear and obvious about how certain it is. So in this case, it was saying it's only 25% sure that it was a dinosaur on a skateboard, when in fact the interface, this particular presentation, suggested that it was 100% sure.
Yeah. So not many designers involved in that process. Maybe.
Yeah, that's right.
Could be some improvements.
Yeah, that's right. And this is a very simple example because it's just sort of a little bot that's the charm of following this particular bot is how ridiculous some of its statements are.
Part of its humor. Yeah,
and the fact that it does it with complete certainty. So in a way, it's the charm of following it. That's also, it suggests some of the mistakes that we may be making in other applications and interfaces.
You authored the book, what is it called? Design for Touch.
Yes, that's right. Designing for Touch.
What do you think about touch? Is it going to persist? Or?
Yeah, I think I think that very few interfaces go away, especially when they're successful. So in the same way that I don't think that touch will ever kill the keyboard, which has really still very precise uses for certain things, and touch I think has proven to be very simple and easy to use for so many tasks, but also dangerous in some cases. Yeah. Putting them in cars where you have to look at the screen while you're driving, that there's no tactile feedback, is a dangerous thing to do. So it's not good in all places. But I think that it's shown that it is incredibly flexible as an interaction. I think that actually one of the challenges for designers is not so much whether an interface or a channel that we've learned and used is going to go away, but more that it's just we're going to continue to keep adding more and more and more and more. So I think the interesting challenge actually ahead is thinking about how do we let people move easily between a touch interface and a speech interface, and between these other devices that we have in our lives.
The multimodal
thing, that's right. Cheryl Platts was talking about that today in her really great talk about voice interfaces. Because I think that's a real problem. And we feel it all the time because we're constantly texting and emailing ourselves information just to get it from, my phone here to my computer 2 feet away. Yeah. It's ridiculous. We're sending it way up into space through the satellite and back down to the computer just to move it over here. Yeah. We feel that problem as consumers, but we haven't really tried to address it as designers.
You showed that movie with your colleague tapping into the to the screen with the mobile phone and shaking it over.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we hacked together this little project. My friend Larry Legend and I did this, and it's basically the idea was just like sort of like a little weekend hacking project, where if you're playing music on your iPhone, you can go over and just shake the music into your desktop, and it will just shift over to that device and start playing it in the same way. And we were trying to think about interesting interactions there too, because at first we were sort of stuck on thinking about we could push a button or swipe it across, kind of throw the song across. But we realized that these are two physical devices, two physical spaces. And so we were thinking, well, what if we treated the music with physicality too? And we just could shake it out. And it was a really fun and interesting interaction. And comes back to this idea of making room for play and creating kind of sometimes some toys in ways that stretch the way that you think about possible interactions, and giving yourself permission to sort of splash in puddles before coming back around and bringing these solutions back to. That's right.
That's a good metaphor.
We should be a little bit more childlike.
And that was one thing you said in Lisa's workshop. Now I wrote it down. We are often most human when we play. Yeah. And I agree. I have a background as an actor, so I often play in my presentations and workshops and stuff like that as well. And also the playfulness in experimenting with new things and looking at things from a different angle.
Yeah, because I think that's the hardest thing about trying to understand new technologies and new opportunities is how can we remove ourselves from our habits, the ruts that we find ourselves in, because so often we try to apply our old techniques to the new thing. Because it's natural. It's like these are the habits and routines that we have. And so I think sometimes play, toys, removing ourselves from our typical domain can trigger new possibilities.
I was thinking about my experience with the AirPods. I love my AirPods because they interact so well with my phone. But also, I have these tap signals. Are you using them yourself?
Yeah, I don't have them, but I know them,
Yeah, you tap on them to give them different directions. And I use Siri a lot nowadays, but it's much less intrusive and much less embarrassing to tap it and then ask Siri to call than to say, "Hello Siri, can you call my wife?" So I use it a lot when I bike, for example. It's a perfect example of multimodality and different inputs, I think.
Yeah. And what do you use it for when you're biking? Is it mostly for phone calls or for your to-do list?
Even
or
texting, depending.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or taking notes. Or switching between music is also, I think, because you can do some settings with it, just jumping ahead one track and stuff like that.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's interesting. I mean, obviously, things like Google Home and Echo are getting a lot of attention for voice, particularly because it's the thing that goes beyond the phone. But I think that the idea that more and more that we're getting these in-ear headphones where we can speak to them as well starts to become really interesting too, that we can really sort of take these pockets of voice with us everywhere beyond just this stationary place in our living room.
Did you see the 60 Minutes interview with the startup with a neurological mind tech? He Googled with his mind, with neurological waves, and it actually caught words from his.
That's amazing.
That's so extreme.
Crazy. Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, right now we're getting telepathic interfaces.
Yeah, sort of. Maybe it's coming along. But do you reckon that voice is something? Because we were talking about sitting in an office landscape is not the best place to. But maybe this multimodality, jumping between different.
Well, I think that's the exciting thing and the challenging thing about exactly what you're saying about the multimodality is we're having more and more options to be able to use whatever interface is most convenient. I mean, I think this was a huge learning for us as an industry with mobile, that the initial assumption with this is like, oh, well, this is the sidekick to the real computing experience. That we'll just do a stripped down version of everything for the phone. That was the assumption. Because people are going to want to do their quote-unquote real computing on the desktop computer. And of course, the thing that we've learned over time is the best interface is the most convenient interface.
It's mobile first.
Yeah. And so we've all been in that situation where we're on the couch watching TV and we want to do something, but you know what? The computer is just out of reach, right? That is probably the best interface, but just in that particular context, it is unavailable because it is 4 feet away instead of my phone, which is 6 inches away. I think that the same thing is going to apply with voice, that in many cases that will be a convenient interface, particularly as voice recognition improves and natural language processing improves. I think that the voice recognition is going better than the natural language, that more and more it's accurately understanding the words we say, but then what do you do with those words is becoming trickier. So I think one of the real problems for the current crop of voice assistants is that you have to ask for things in very precise ways. Yeah. And you sort of start to feel like one of the students in Harry Potter sort of trying to figure out the right incantation, but accidentally turning your friend into a ferret. Yeah. It's sort of that's the way it feels, where it's just like you say the same thing 10 times over and you still can't get the thing to happen because you can't remember this magic spell that you have to say, the precise incantation.
And the machine, you adapt to the machine to be able to talk to it.
That's right.
You learn pretty quick to adapt to it.
Yeah, so we talk like the machine instead of the machine talking like us. Yeah. But I think as we've also seen is like we're a little uncomfortable with the machine talking like us. Yeah. And so there's this interesting thing of what is true to the bot, I think is an interesting question to ask, because it doesn't feel right for it to speak like a human if it's not capable like a human. If it's different from a human, then be different from a human. And, I think that one thing that we all learned in the workshop as we looked at how these APIs understand images that you give them or speech or text that you give them is they don't see the world that we do as the way we do. They are strange. The machines are strange. And they interpret things differently. And so perhaps we'll develop similarly some appropriate way for them to communicate that reflects that difference. Yeah. What is the communication and the interface that is true to the robot is, I think, sort of the interesting design challenge of the next few years or even decades.
Because basically it's just a giant calculator.
For the moment, that's what machine learning is it's just crunching the data, looking for patterns, and building up patterns eventually that are sophisticated enough to come to conclusions. But it's not thought. That's right. There are different lines of artificial intelligence that do attempt to teach computers to model human cognition and to effectively think. But that work has stalled out a couple of decades ago. There's still people interested in pursuing it, but it turns out to be very hard. And so the current crop of work is really focused on sort of a brute force. It's much more elegant than that, but it is effectively just crunching tons and tons of data and extracting patterns on very narrow subjects to be able to simulate thought and analysis.
Oh, great thoughts. I'm going to let you off the hook. Where can you're Big Medium Josh on Twitter if people want to follow you and learn more?
That's right. Big Medium Josh on Twitter or bigmedium.com on the web.
I recommend it. And thanks for the talk.
Thank you, Jan. It's a pleasure to get to know you.
And if you want more information about Josh Clark and UX design, I recommend our website, Effekten.se. That's Effekten. And in Swedish. Besök oss gärna på Effekten.se. Där hittar du mer avsnitt om digitaliseringen och UX och allt det här som Josh har pratat om. Det är mestadels avsnitt på svenska förstås, men vi har några engelska också. Välkommen till Effekten.se och välkommen också att prenumerera på podden. Den finns där du hittar dina övriga poddar. Effekten.